Hey, what's up? My name is Nelson, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite horror movies. First off, I'm going to start out with my honorable mentions, and I'm going to be very brief with these. The Conjuring 2. This was a great predecessor to the first Conjuring, being one of, we'll get there, it's definitely on my list, of my favorite horror films. And it was much scarier, I thought. And, you know, with Valak and all that, the nun was just such a scary element to bring into the franchise, and it made for such a great sequel. Then I'm going to talk about the Blair Witch Project. This movie, it really started a phenomenon back in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the found footage genre got really, really big. And this movie, it spawned a lot of other films. And that brings me to my next honorable mention, Paranormal Activity. This was such a huge movie back in 2007. I remember all my friends talking about it and being so scared of this movie in general, and just being like, you know, oh, you know, what if this really happened and all that. And like, with it not being such a, I mean, it was 2007. I mean, internet wasn't as accessible as it is now, so just like the Blair Witch Project, maybe not just like, because the Blair Witch Project came out in 1999, but I just remember everyone being so freaked out by this movie, and that's why it is one of my favorite movies of all time. I could do an entire video about Paranormal Activity, which I might in the future. Alright, coming in at number 10, The Conjuring. This was huge. This was so huge back in the day, and this was so huge in 2013. And I remember it introducing me to just different elements of horror and different ways you could tell different stories within horror, and just how it just tells a different story throughout. With, you have what's going on with a family and what's going on with Ed and Lorraine, and that makes this movie for me just one of the greatest horror films of all time. James Wan, he's such a brilliant mind when it comes to the horror genre. And that's a lot of the reason why I really, really love this. I mean, with the acting too, you got Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson as Ed and Lorraine, and they have just taken on these roles and they just have crushed it for years and years. And this kind of kicked off with the Annabelle doll and all that. That doll is in this movie a little bit with the story where you kind of get to know Ed and Lorraine. And yeah, the first Annabelle wasn't good, but the other two I think are pretty good movies. And just the Annabelle doll in general is just such a creepy aspect of this movie. Coming in at number 9 is Scream. Scream has always been one of those movies that I just absolutely have loved. This movie kind of showed that you can have more humor in a horror film. It was such a freaky movie, and I remember first time seeing this. I have told this story on my channel, but I actually snuck this movie into another case so my mom didn't see it, and I remember taking it home, just being like 11, 12 years old, and watching this movie and just being so terrified of it. And it's something that I've been able to rewatch every single year. It's a must watch at least twice a year for me. I mean, what Wes Craven did with these movies was just so amazing. I mean, all of these movies in a whole, you know, 1 through 4 are all so amazing, and I am very, very excited for 5. The only thing I ask for, you know, 5 Cream is that they just stick with Wes Craven's vision throughout the whole series. And with that trailer that dropped, I really see a lot of Wes Craven in that. Coming in at number 8 is Jordan Peele's Get Out. This movie, I remember seeing this movie for the first time, and I kind of wasn't on the hype train for this when it first came out. I just wasn't sure a Jordan Peele movie with, I love Jordan Peele from, like, Key and Peele, but, like, I just wasn't too sure. Then I started hearing some hype around it, and I ended up buying it and just completely falling in love with it. I love psychological horror. That is probably my favorite type of horror. That's the kind of stuff that freaks me out. So this movie, it is so freaky, and it gets into your head and makes you just think, and it's got a great message behind it. And for Jordan Peele's first outing as a director, he really, really killed it. And this is definitely one of my favorite horror films of all time. Coming in at number 7 is Shaun of the Dead. What Edgar Wright did in this movie was amazing. And what he's done with all of these, you got Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, The World's End. He's just such a great director. He just makes such beautiful films in general, and just such funny films, and I love that British dry humor throughout this. And Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, they always pair up so well for me, and this movie is no exception. I just love how they added, there is some very scary moments in this movie. There's very funny moments. This movie gets very emotional at times, especially when his mother dies. It gets very, very emotional in this movie. And it's something I can watch over and over again. I actually watch this every year on my birthday, just because I know it's something that I'm going to love watching again and again. And when I want to watch something good, I watch Shaun of the Dead. Coming in at number 6, and I'm going to be very brief with this one because I do have a video on my channel about it. It's Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. I've said a lot about this. I love this movie. It is what set the map up for so many, like, self-aware and funny horror films, like your Screams, like your Happy Death Days. And it is definitely, for me, the best Friday the 13th movie. Coming in at number 5 is Hereditary. This movie, I can't talk about how in general, how beautiful this movie is in general, and just how terrifying this movie is. I've seen this movie a total of 2 times, and it's such a rough watch, as it being one of my favorite movies of all time. It's just a really hard movie for me to watch. I have to be in the right mind, the right state of mind, to be able to watch this movie. Ari Aster, he is on his way to be just going down in history for me. If he can keep doing with what he's doing, with what he did with Hereditary and what he did with Midsommar, he could go down in history as one of the greatest horror directors of all time. He is on that path if he can keep going. And I'm just really, really excited to see what he can do. And the acting in this movie, Toni Collette, Alex Wolff, those are the big standouts in this movie. And I just adore Toni Collette. This is one of her best performances as an actress. She kills every role she's in. She goes from doing Hereditary, this, like, supernatural, like, gothic type horror, and then she goes to do, like, a Knives Out and playing just a completely different character, and she just kills every role. Alex Wolff, he played a very emotional character, and what happens in this movie to him. And I applaud the actor in general, because he did go through a lot with this movie, what I've read online, just because it was just such a hard film to act in and to just work on. But I love this movie so much. And it is my favorite A24 movie. And A24 is probably my favorite studio. It's weird. I love Marvel Studios and then A24. And A24, they put out bangers every single year. But Hereditary, out of all the A24 movies I've seen like 80 or something, somewhere around that. I love this one the most. So that says a lot. Coming in at number 4, another movie that I've talked about on this channel, Halloween 1978. I'm going to be very brief with this one, just like the last one. This is the greatest slasher of all time. John Carpenter, one of, if not the greatest horror director of all time. This is just something I can watch over and over again and just never get bored of watching. It is the best Halloween movie, and it has spawned so many great sequels and so many different slashers. My favorite slasher, this might be my favorite slasher movie, but my favorite killer is Jason Voorhees. And without this, we wouldn't have that. We wouldn't have, you know, a lot of these slashers that we do now. And John Carpenter just killed it. We're getting down to the bottom three. My three favorite horror films of all time. Coming in at number 3, A Quiet Place. I know that this movie isn't a lot of people's favorite movie of all time, but for me, this really hit me when I watched this movie for the first time. And what John Krasinski did with this movie was amazing, just acting in it and directing it. He just blew me away with his debut. These comedian type guys coming in here, like your Jordan Peele's and your John Krasinski's, coming into horror and just killing it. And then you got Emily Blunt, and they, in the movie, they feed off of each other so much. And it's just such a great, like, family in tragedy, and the only thing that's keeping them together is love. And it's just such a beautiful, beautiful story. And this is honestly something that you could show your, you know, family. I mean, it's something you could show your parents, you know? I really could. You really could. It is a great family movie that is terrifying at the same time. And that's why I love this movie so much. Coming in at number 2, The Shining. I actually didn't watch The Shining too quick. This is not something that I grew up watching. And I am kind of glad that I didn't, I watched this about 4 or 5 years ago. I was an adult when I watched this movie, and I feel like that really did help me with how much I did like it, and how much it affected me watching this movie, and just how terrified I was after watching it. Just that ending to this movie is just so chilling. And just watching Jack fall into this craze is it's such a beautiful and terrifying, and just the way it's filmed. Stanley Kubrick he killed it. I know that Stephen King doesn't love this, and I just don't know how he couldn't. I didn't read the book, which I really do want to read it, and I did buy it. I haven't had a chance to read it quite yet. But this movie, though, it is such a beautiful movie. It's such a scary movie, and it's something that I watched for the first time, 4 or 5 years ago, and I was just like, it's something I couldn't get out of my mind for a long, long time. I do hate what happened to Shelley Duvall on the set of this film, and that is uncalled for in every way, and I did want to mention that. Coming in at number 1, I kind of debated putting this on here, and it is my favorite horror film, because I wasn't too sure if it was really a horror, but I think it is, and this is my list. Number 1 is Jaws. Jaws is something that I did grow up with, and it is just one of those movies. It's very rewatchable, for one, and the way that this is filmed, Steven Spielberg, this really did kind of put him on the map a little bit. Just the way he shot this film, and the fact that you don't see the shark very often, that makes this movie a lot more terrifying. And just scenes like when all 3 of the guys in the movie are sitting, they're all drinking and they're sitting in the boat. Robert starts to tell them, that story, that sailor's story about the, terrifying ocean. It's just that scene, and all the sharks coming in and eating all those people because of the shipwreck and all that. And that was it's just such a terrifying and chilling scene. And just the things like that are just so well done in this movie and what makes this movie so terrifying. I mean, I live nowhere near an ocean, but you know, because of this movie, it was hard to get into a pool after you watched this movie because you never knew if Jaws was going to get you. And watching this at such a young age, too, didn't help. But I love that the shark broke and because it broke, you don't see it a whole lot. It doesn't look perfect. This movie's 1975, but just not seeing it a whole lot really, really helped and really made this movie just that much better. Just hearing that that score and just knowing you never know when it's going to pop out. It's just so scary, and I could go on and on. But that is my top 10 favorite horror films of all time. If any of you have been following my Halloween special with doing all of reviewing horror films throughout, I really enjoyed doing it, so just wanted to mention that. But if you like what I'm doing on this channel, like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at NelsonReviews. Follow me on Letterboxd at Nelson48. Peace out.